Not too long ago, I was doing some home renovation and full painting, carpets, landscaping, everything like that. And it was a lot of work to be done on a really short deadline. And so I kind of went into this switch mode, like becoming a machine. Have you ever done that? You got the list, you know it's an impossible list in the amount of time, and so you just bust it. And I'll tell you, this is not my field of expertise by any stretch of the means, but there was something really enlivening about doing this stuff. I mean, changing fixtures. I stooped to reading the instructions. And it helped, and getting that stuff done, and then just going check, 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 getting that list done. I mean, it became this series of days and days in where it became a whole focused week where I would literally get up and immediately grab something and go to work, eat it while I was at work, while I was doing the project, take a couple breath breaks during the day, maybe grab a meal, and then go to sleep and do it again, just work the entire waking hours. And there was something kind of addictive about seeing the wall clean painted, about seeing flowers where there used to be weeds, about seeing the sun glisten on a place where it used to be dark. There was something addictive about getting it done, sitting down, and looking at the work complete. Do you remember getting your first job? Do you remember feeling the excitement of, wow, they said yes. I went to the interview and it worked. Whatever happened, I need to make notes because that worked. Do you remember getting your first paycheck? Or maybe it was cash that somebody handed you for completing a job, and it dawned on you, this is kind of a cool idea. I just invested myself here and it created money, and now I can buy stuff. I think this works. I might try this again. Do you remember getting your first really kind of sweet spot job, if that's ever happened to you, where you're thinking, now this is not just a job, this is a career. I could do this for I love this work. Do you remember how good it felt to have other people affirm you and say, wow, you're really doing a great job. This is a great fit for you. You're really good at this. Do you remember getting your first promotion, if that's ever happened to you, and feeling like you just got a little taller. You just made a little bit more money. You just have a few more people that you supervise. This is awesome. There's something inherently good about work that can also be a little bit addictive. Work is one of those things where we're putting it on the categories, but it's different than drug addiction. It's quite a bit different than alcohol addiction. It's different than pornography addiction. We've talked about all these kinds of things. Work is primarily a good gift. And one of our definitions of addiction is to take God's gift and use it for Satan's what? Purposes. It's using God's gift for Satan's purposes. Work is one of those clear indicators of God's good gifts. That's more obvious. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, work's not my job. You don't know where I work. Maybe so. But work in itself, the ability to do something that makes a difference in the world, that's a great gift. We also got to watch for those, though, those good ones, because those are the ones that can turn on us without us noticing. What I'd like to do for a moment is take you back to algebra. I did not like algebra, so we won't go deep into it. In fact, I didn't like it so much I'm not even sure this is algebra at all. This is an XY axis. You know what this is? XY axis? Okay, so this one goes up and this one goes over. And so this axis is what feels good. This is stuff that feels good, and this is stuff that is good. So there are different things that feel good that are not good for us. For example, jumping off of a really tall building may feel incredibly exhilarating for about 10 seconds. It's not good for us. There are things that do not really feel good. I was going to use a colonoscopy as an example because I know I've been praying for a few of you these last few weeks. That may not be a high feel good, but it is probably good for you. So I want to paint a few pictures here because we relate to these different quadrants differently. So there are some things that feel good and they are good for us. Those are things we just enjoy. Those are things like eating a really ripe piece of fruit. Man, it tastes delicious and it's good for us. Things like if you like to run, you like to jog on a beautiful afternoon like today, that feels good to you. And some of you, that's not in that category, but it's also good for you. Or having a great communication with a friend, a really nice talk that feels wonderful and it's good for both of you. Now, there are things that feel good that are not good for us. Some of these addictions are great examples. There are really gratifying moments that we know this is not good for us at all. Those are the things that we obviously try to avoid. Let's take heroin use as an example. There might be an incredible high, but we know it's taking us down in terms of our health. There are also things that feel bad, and they are bad for us. Smashing our finger with a hammer. That feels bad, and it is bad. There's nothing good about it. We don't have to try. We just naturally avoid those. And there are things that they are good, but they don't feel good, like regular exercise or habits. Those are called areas of discipline. What I want us to notice is that work is one of those things that generally falls into this category. And this is the category that we kind of got to watch with addictions because it is good and it tends to feel good. There are some good rewards for work. But anything in this category, when it becomes idolatry, when it displaces God in our life, can switch over here. Without us even knowing it, we can still do something that is inherently good and still feels like we've got the reward of doing good. You guys see that over here? And we still feel the rewards, but we've lost the perspective to realize this is now harming us and those around us. Work can be one of those things. I want to give just a brief overview of American work. And to say it's an addiction really is a clinical reality for about 10% of the population. Some estimates are higher, and they'll use the same questions on an addictive scale that you'd use for drugs and alcohol effects. And some people, their work, their job really is that category. It's an addiction for them, and it causes harm in some way or another. For others, work is sort of just out of balance. It's become a struggle. It's become sort of leaning too far into that category of there's a lot of good about it, but it's causing some damage and it needs a little bit of rectifying. This morning I want to look at the primary difference that it makes to recognize who the king is and the way the king shapes the work. To do this, I would like to look and contrast two different kings in the Old Testament. We're actually going to go pretty deep into the beginning of Scripture and look at Genesis and Exodus, a couple passages in both of those. And as we read those, I'd like to work with them a little bit together. If you would like to read with me, I'd really, really encourage it today more than most days. It's not going to be up. So if you have a Bible or device, you can move to Exodus chapter 1. That's the first place we're going to read. Exodus chapter 1, verse 7. I'll give you a moment to get there. In fact, if you're on this side, we're going to focus on Exodus 1. If you're on this side, your side is going to focus on Genesis 1. And there'll be a couple other passages related to that. So if you guys want to turn to Genesis 1:26, that's where you'll highlight an emphasis reading, Genesis 1:26. This side, we'll focus on Exodus 1:7 and go on from there. After we read your passage side, I'm going to ask a few questions of you, and I'd love for you to actually say some answers that we'll collect. Same thing for you. So you guys will represent the Pharaoh, the Pharaoh that we're reading about. You guys will represent Yahweh, the King, God, who is contrasted to Pharaoh. Okay, Exodus 1:7 through 14. I'm going to start with this side. I'd love for you to pay attention to what kind of king the Hebrews are working for. And I'll ask you some questions about what kind of king this is. Exodus 1:7, but their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt. Here we go. Here's the picture. This king knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us, and they're stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they'll join our enemies and fight against us. They will escape from the country." So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and work in the fields. They were ruthless in their demands. I want to add one verse onto that section, chapter 5:17, when Moses has come from God asking Pharaoh to let his people go so that they may go out into the wilderness and worship their God. This is Pharaoh's reply. But Pharaoh shouted, "You're just lazy. Lazy. That's why you're saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' Now get back to work." Okay. Left side. What are some descriptions of this king, Pharaoh? Front half of the rows, you're probably going to need to do all the work because nobody behind you is going to say anything. This is Pharaoh. How would you describe him? What are some words? Ruthless, okay. What else? Slave driver, good. Your side is coming, just don't despair. You'll do God. What else? Scared, yeah. He's scared. What else?
Rude. No mercy.
Okay, good. No mercy. Did you say rude or shrewd? Shrewd. Please don't say words I don't know how to spell. What else? One more.
You said demanding.
Demanding. Okay, yep. We're going to pause for about 60 seconds. If you worked for a king like this, and maybe some of you can relate because you feel like this is similar to your reality at work, how does that affect your work? How does that affect your work? Take a moment with the people around you and just process out loud for about 30 seconds. I'm not going to give you a long time, but just talk. How does it affect your work when you work for this kind of person? Go ahead and talk. Okay, we're going to still lean on this side for the answers here. What's one of the ways it affected your work?
I worked for him, and it made me slow down.
Okay. Okay, you worked for this person and it made you slow down. You were rebelling. What else?
Like them, I wanted to get away from it.
You wanted to get away from it? Yep. What else? How did it affect your work? Bring lots of joy? The anxiety and stress just transfers. It's terrible. Okay, now we're going to switch this side. This side is going to represent God. Yahweh here in the story is, we're going to rewind back to creation and see God at work and see God giving work and contrast him as the king as opposed to Pharaoh. So we're going to start in Genesis 1:26. I'm going to ask you the same questions. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, the wild animals on earth, and the small animals that scurry." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish, the birds, and the animals." Then God said, "Look, I've given you every seed-bearing plant throughout all of the earth and all the fruit trees for your food, and I've given you every green plant as food for all the wild animals and for everything that has life." Then God looked over all that he had made, and he saw that it was very, what? Good. And evening and morning came, marking the sixth day. So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy or distinct, because it was the day when he rested from his work of creation. I want to add a couple verses to that from Exodus chapter 16:26. God is now speaking to the Israelites that he rescued from Pharaoh, and they are no longer slaves. And God says to them, "You may gather food for 6 days, but the seventh day is the Sabbath. There will be no food on the ground that day." Some of the people went out anyway on the seventh day, but they found no food. I love this part. The Lord asked Moses, "How long will these people refuse to obey my commands? They must realize that the Sabbath is the Lord's gift to you." Right side, what are some descriptions of God as king?
Peaceful.
Yeah, there's just this sense of he's not worried or stressed about creation. He's doing the whole universe, but it's just a beautiful process. What else? Giving. Yeah. He's generous. What else? Merciful. Creator. Loving. Did I hear kind? He blesses. Yeah, did you notice the distinct repeated phrases here? Pharaoh was afraid that they would grow and multiply, so he tried to work the life out of them. God blessed them to grow and multiply and gave them work to be a part of that growth. Good, we have room for one more.
Delegates.
Yeah, it delegates. Okay, let's take about 30 seconds and answer the same question. How does it affect your work if you work for God? Go ahead and talk for just about half a minute. Right side, how did it affect your work when you work for God? Where do we apply?
Not pressured.
Yeah. What else? Yeah. Motivating.
Creative.
Creative? That's great.
Willing to do more than they ask.
Yeah. Rewarding? What else? Empowered? What else?
Disneyland, not hell.
Good. Good. What else? Do you feel the emotional difference on this side versus this side? Now, some of you may feel like you work for more this side of a human boss. And so I'm not here to offer simple solutions for that. Maybe you really need to pray like the Israelites that God would deliver you out of this oppressive situation and into a better place. And like the Israelites, maybe God will, but maybe he'll take a very long time because he's working out plans you can't see. Or maybe it's time to take steps into a better place. Or maybe there are things that God is teaching you over here that he's going to use over here. I'm not sure about that. But what I do want to ask is at the internal level, your internal boss, your internal king, when you have a day off and you have a to-do list and nobody's telling you, when you retire and all you have to deal with is the king inside of you, which king? Because I believe you can actually be set free, the majority of it, from the inside king, even if you still work for Pharaoh. Some of that addiction that we sense in our own work, or some of the places where it becomes less than good, is when that ancient Egyptian voice starts speaking from the inside of us again and starts saying the same kinds of things that it did so long ago. And for us, freedom can come in a lot of simple ways when we begin to recapture the reality that God is our king. We work for him. The whole world runs underneath his authority. And we might ask ourselves, am I working in a way that pleases God? What happens far too often for me, and I don't know if this ever happens for you, but my life just somehow has this strong gravitational pull to slip into being ergocentric. Ergocentric, where ergo is the Greek root for work. All of life revolves around work. It's like the center of the orbital system, you know what I mean? Everything revolves around it. You get up and your whole schedule, your whole life, your whole thoughts, your whole family dynamic, your whole routines, your whole everything just sort of revolves around work. And for many of us, that's so normal, we don't recognize that is the center of our lives. What's kind of twisted about that is ministry can happen so easily for that to be the case. God becomes a planetary orbit around work. Then sometimes clarity will come and you can shift your life from being ergocentric to theocentric, meaning God-centered, where work is one of those things that orbits around God. And when that happens, friends, that's a much better way to live. And some of that is just going back to surrendering internally to let God be the king. Here's how I'd like to conclude today. Got about 5 minutes. I'd just like to conclude with a couple notes about the character of God and then asking you to prepare and equip a little bit for after this series. So 3 of the things that really cause work addiction. Number 1 is anxiety, 2 is ambition, and 3 is avoidance. When we find ourselves working in a way that's addictive and compulsive, we're often anxious, or it's related to ambition or avoidance. We're anxious that we won't survive. There's not enough money. How do we pay the bills? So that anxiety drives endless work. We're ambitious to try to create more and fill gaps and holes in our lives, or improve our identity, and we try to do that through work, or we're trying to avoid something else we don't want to go home to or we don't want to deal with, so we just put ourselves into these work. What we can remember from the character of God that can calm these 3 A's that drive addiction is God provides and he partners with us. Our work is stabilized by those 2 anchors of God's character. God provides for us and he partners with us. Providing for us lets us step back a little bit and realize at the end of the day, he's in charge. He is the one. And he's partnering with us. We're not working alone. We're meant to work hard. We're meant to do our best as we're partnering with God. This is the last few minutes of the Addicted series, and then we're going to wrap it up and move on to something else. And part of my hope is that throughout this series, some who have been a part of our church have found some freedom. Really hope that's true. In fact, I know it's true. I've heard some stories. But another part of the hope is that we could take that freedom and share it and spread it with other people in our lives. I know you probably have a friend, family member, coworker who struggles with addiction. You may have had conversations, or you might have a conversation next week with somebody in that case. And so what I'd like to do is recap for just a moment the 7 layers of freedom diagram. I love what Ben said in his interview this morning. One person, like a pastor, can make some difference, but all of us being God's hands and feet everywhere, we can make a lot of difference. So I'm going to draw this diagram. What I'd like you to do is just take the last 2 or 3 minutes and just discuss with somebody else how you can use this to maybe share hope or freedom with somebody else. If you don't want to talk about it, maybe you just want to take a minute and pray for somebody that you know who's struggling with addiction anonymously. Just pray for them. Can we stand together? You know those last 3 words I say after every worship gathering? Do you remember what they are? You are sent. Yeah, this is what you're sent to do. You're sent to find, to recognize, to see people in your life that God has put there on purpose, and to be his gracious love to them, to help them find the freedom that they can have in Jesus. I hope he gives you uncomfortable opportunities this week to do just that. Ben will be at the resource table. There's also some literature there. There's a couple people here who would love to pray with you. If you have anything you'd like to pray about, they'll be up here after you're done. If we haven't met, I'd love to say hi to you. And if you'd like a quick tour of the building, we can do that too. Come up and say hi afterwards. And now may the love of God, the peace of Jesus Christ, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you as you go. You are sent.